So that allows me to thank Hanna for allowing me to join her presentation and to do half of it. And it also allows me to thank Tomasz for accepting me being here and talking about finance options for infrastructure. In general, I find that his idea of looking into the future and going beyond the current programming period is of great value. That's exactly what should be done now, because we all know about the long lead times of infrastructure projects. We know that we need to learn from pilot projects before we can mainstream those projects. So it's very timely that this working session is taking place here. In terms of my background, I'm not new to the Czech Republic. I used to work for EBRD, and I was some time ago the country director, also responsible for the Czech Republic, but based in Bratislava. So I covered a few countries. And at that time, of course, we tried to develop PPPs as well, because EBRD's focus was on private sector operations, also in infrastructure. But then Mr. Klaus had different ideas as what the future of EBRD should be, and I met him once in a restaurant by chance, and he said to me, "Alex, why are you still here? You should leave the Czech Republic. We don't need a development bank here." So that's how EBRD left the Czech Republic. But I ended up with a few supervisory board seats, and one of them was for this PPP project, in fact, Grandi Stazioni, which got into the news recently because the concession contract was terminated. I was on the supervisory board until 2 years ago, and so that discussion goes beyond the scope, of course, of this meeting, but would be interesting to understand better what happened there, because I felt it was a very successful concession. And so that's what it is. With respect to JASPERS, I'm a member of JASPERS. I'm de facto seconded to JASPERS by EBRD, and I'm a hybrid person. EBRD had this idea that JASPERS should not exclusively be a technical outfit of the EIB. Of course, that's very important, and the EU who is funding this initiative, who is funding JASPERS, needs to make sure that a certain quality of projects is achieved. And that's why JASPERS has mainly economists and also engineers. And I'm the only finance person, because we thought there must be finance questions as well. Unfortunately, I have been now with JASPERS for almost 2 years. There have been almost no finance questions, because what's happening is also obvious to you. The various countries are trying to maximize the absorption of structural funds. They try to accelerate the absorption as much as possible. They want to get the maximum grant amount per project under the operational programs. They have no time, no space to look at other options how to finance infrastructure. I find it a pity, for the reasons Tomasz has explained so well in his introduction. So I have been almost idle. But there's a glimmer of hope I see. There was a so-called stakeholders meeting recently. So that's where the JASPERS people get together with all the managing authorities from the countries. And there was a vote at the end of this 2 days event. And the question was, what do you need JASPERS for most? And the surprising answer, and it's still not entirely clear why this was the most prominent answer, but the answer was, we need JASPERS for financial engineering purposes. Of course, them knowing that there are no finance person in JASPERS, but they must have sensed that this nice period of great amounts of grants is coming to an end, and that they need to better look into the future and think of other options. So that was a very, very interesting voting by the member countries. Please allow me one final statement on the FC. As Hannah has pointed out so well, it's a guarantee facility. But it's, at the same time, it's very difficult to understand it. It took me a while how difficult it is to understand, because it's risk capital for the EIB. It allows the EIB to lend to projects in an amount and using instruments it would not otherwise, it may not otherwise have used or may not have otherwise involved such high amounts. So for the borrower, it may be not even visible, or it may not be noticeable that this is an FC project. It's just, I mean, in the positive sense, labeled an FC project. So if you take the D4R7 project, the EIB would have lent in any case to this project because it is working on it for many years. And I'm not criticizing it, but what it may have led to is a higher loan amount for a higher percentage of the total lending to the project. And overall, it may lead to more projects funded by EIB than it would otherwise have been able to do. It really becomes meaningful, or even more meaningful, when there is a subordinated loan or some risk element where the EIB takes more risk. If that's involved, then it becomes even more meaningful. But so this is what FC really is, and these are also the limitations. But overall, in the overall scope of things, it probably does make a difference. And in any case, it triggers the discussion on infrastructure finance and the infrastructure gap. So, yeah, I have not even started with the first slide. That's how I am. I always talk about things which come to my mind when I sit in front of an audience. So this is the list of transport projects under FC. Some of them are approved, some of them are signed, and then there's a smaller group probably where the disbursement has started. I leave it to you to go through this list. There are a few projects you are familiar with, a few from Central Europe, but because of the lead time of infrastructure projects, the expectation had been higher and has not yet entirely been met, has not met the expectations it set itself. A few words on financial instruments. I'm also myself confused as to what is a financial instrument, what isn't. But the FC, I guess, is a financial instrument. And then you have a series of instruments which are project related. And the basic driver for these financial instruments is they only come to play when there is a risk element in a project. If you have a sovereign or a sub-sovereign operation, then there's little risk, you don't need a financial instrument. Because what a financial instrument does, it deals with risk. And by everyone knowing, the public sector, but also the private sector, by knowing that these instruments exist, they can be a little bit more they can assume that eventually the project will be financed, because when lenders have a problem taking all the risk, they know that potentially there's an instrument, there are instruments which help them tackle the most difficult parts of the risk in a project. So you need some sort of a commercial private sector operation in order to deploy these instruments. The next slide talks about identifying projects for financial instruments. Yes, that's fine. And there are certain criteria, in essence, that it must be a commercially viable project, but also that you have quantifiable risks, because if you want to guarantee risks, you need to quantify them first. But what this slide should not imply is that you try to identify projects because financial instruments do exist. What you do is you develop projects in the private sector or involving the private sector because you believe that's useful for efficiency reasons, for allocation of risk reasons, for implementation reasons, for non-cost overrun reasons and delay reasons. And then if you have a good project which makes sense, but where banks are still not happy, then you use a financial instrument. What is much closer to my heart, what is also very close to my heart is what really are success factors for PPP projects. And we thought long about this list, and maybe it's not complete. But what you definitely need, and I guess one could stop after the first bullet point, you need a clear and visible political commitment. A commitment which goes beyond the commitment maybe of one minister or one high-level official, but which is a commitment by the whole government, and which is a commitment which is not a one-off commitment, but where the investors see that it's a commitment over time, a long-term commitment where the policy doesn't change all the time. That's what you need as a precondition. And then you have all sorts of other factors. A project, and the second bullet point is also quite interesting, the project should come out of the planning process for transport projects. It should not be one where suddenly the government says, oh, let's do a PPP project, let's do this one. Maybe it says, let's do this one because it's so difficult, we cannot tackle it. Let's ask the private sector to do something about it. That would be wrong. It has to come out of the planning process, and it has to be, by definition, a priority project. That means a good project, a commercially viable project, one which makes sense, where the economic viability is there. That's also important. And then all kinds of other success factors, from awareness about the resources and the time, advisors, etc., etc. I unfortunately cannot go into more details. The Eurostat issue, I have to say, I guess will become less and less a critical issue. What should really happen, that's not the case in the Slovak Republic with the D4R7 project, but many of the projects should be really on balance sheet. We need to be aware of the fact that 85% of all PPP projects done in Europe are based on availability payments. That's not so well known, but if you analyze the nature of the projects, then most of them are based on availability payments. And the payment stream comes from the government. And there's a tendency now on the side of Eurostat to force the governments to book it on balance sheet. Anyway, this should not be the driving force. That's why it shouldn't be such a big discussion. But another point relating to financial instruments, the reason, because there are so many availability-based projects where the risk level is limited or reduced, the financial instruments, as I just described them, and as you will see a few examples of in the next slide, are becoming, in fact, a little bit less relevant. Because if you have a payment stream from the government and your main risk after construction is just the operation of the asset, you don't need a project bond enhancement necessarily. That's also why I think the EIB, after many years of existence of this project bond, has not done too many. So availability-based PPPs are rather lower type risk projects in reality. And they are completely dominant, especially in the road sector. An important point, it was mentioned before, we are about to see the launch of a call by DG Move of an amount of 1 billion for projects, for transport projects, which fit into the Connecting Europe facility logic. So direct or indirect cross-border link. And the idea is to blend these amounts with FC funding. So you will soon, or the countries will soon see this call, and then the authorities can apply. The fund, the CEF funds will come from the general pot. That means that the grant rates will be lower, so they will expect it to be between, I don't know, 25 and 40%. And because EFSI will be involved, you need some sort of a PPP type arrangement or something where you have risk. So I'm running out of time. This is one of the topics I was referring to during my intervention in the morning. It's about blending SCIF grants and PPPs. This has always been possible, also under the previous programming period. And APEC, you know, this PPP center, advisory, so European PPP Advisory Center is an EIB, part of an EIB department. They did a stock take and they found 49 blended projects in the previous programming period and going further back. And then they looked at the deficiencies. And as a result of this discussion, under the new programming period, under the Common Provisions Regulations on ESI funds, this blending is made easier in several respects. First of all, the regulation is explicit on the possibility of blending, which was not so the case in the past. Then the timing of PPPs and ESIF grants of the process can be done in parallel. So there's no time delay and no uncertainty. But of course, this presentation goes time-wise. I mean, we cannot afford to discuss this in detail. And among others, and this is the fifth bullet point, one can use escrow accounts, and the Commission can pay the funds to this escrow account, and then the amounts on the escrow account can be used to partially fund the availability payments. The big weakness in all this, for reasons which we need to discuss, is that although we are now in the middle of this programming period, there has been not one blended project. In fact, a big disaster. We don't quite understand why. With respect to Central European countries, it's fairly clear because they need to focus on the absorption of the structural funds, and they have no time and energy for this sort of blending. And anyway, there's the suspicion that PPPs are not good, and so on. So there's a lot of baggage. The fact of the matter is that it can be used probably quite easily, but we're running out of time, and so far we have no project. It's a disaster. APEC has done very nice guidelines on how to do this, how to blend ESIF and PPPs, and it's a good tool because it reduces the affordability. It makes the whole project much easier to manage. I'm now stopping because the D4R7, which I had as a case study, will be presented, by the colleague from CSOP. And that introduces a new financial instrument, which is a fund of funds to invest. And then there are two. There's one rolling stock project, which you can go through later. Also quite interesting, an interesting blending. And finally, also an FC project for the Riga Transport Company. There the borrower is the Riga Transport Company, but still it is an FC project. Okay, sorry, I was just hinting at issues and topics and problems, but that's as far as much as I can say in this short period of time. Thank you very much.